I had a client who was struggling to set boundaries with her husband. He was always calling and pressuring her to get home faster. Where are you? Why haven't you left yet? You aren't stopping there after work, are you? She was so tired of it, but she didn't know how to address it with him without blowing up. Here was their pattern. She would patiently put up with it all constantly until a particularly tired moment or hard day where she would just lose it on him. I don't have to tell you every second of my day. You aren't my parent. Stop pressuring me and find something to do with your life. Just because you're lonely doesn't mean that you can suffocate me like this. It was so rough. When afterward, she would feel just awful. Like, what kind of a wife talks to her husband like that? And he would get the message for a little while. And so he'd back off for a little while. But then slowly but surely, she would allow him to start making those comments, asking those questions. And in a matter of weeks, maybe a month, they would be right back to that same argument. He would be pressuring her to get home, and she'd be ready to explode from all the pressure again. What was missing from their equation here? Accountability. So let's dive in. Welcome back to the weekly fellowship where we gather for deep, transformational conversation in the fellowship of faithful women. I'm your host, Reagan Clement, and I love working with women in my life coaching programs and online community, the Rising Tide Fellowship. In prayer, I was asked to build community for women to be seen, heard, and nourished in this society of isolation and confusion. When I asked God how in the world to build a community like that with so little funds, his answer was simple: collaboration. So in the past year, I've asked many friends and coaches to step forward and offer their time, talent, and resources to make this community something really special for our members. And it's turned out to be really special for ourselves too. And our members have stepped up to contribute their own unique gifts as well. To spend time with us in community, join today at risingtidefellowship.com. And if you'd like to work with me personally, head to risingtidefellowship.com and just click on my name. Let's get started. Accountability has a lot of different definitions, but it's really about communicating to someone to invite them back in to meet the standard. What standard? Either the standard that they set for themselves, the standard that they hold, the standard that you created together. Like in this instance with my client, the standard of their marriage. So if boundaries are about protecting myself, accountability is about protecting the integrity of the relationship. It's about elevating the other person. But that is not how our culture has been talking about accountability. And so it's very complicated. And there are so many excuses we as women give for not holding people accountable. I give them myself. I'm a professional at excusing behaviors because I don't want to be judgmental. I don't want to hold someone to a standard that is my standard, but not theirs. I want to be a good Christian, so I should be nice, right? Like, and I don't want to go into the big moral picture here of the culture, but since the renewal, the popularity of moral relativism entered our culture, it's been encouraging us to believe that there are no standards. There is no right and wrong. All of us get to be our own little gods, and we can decide what is right and wrong. So as Christian women, we already see the culture, and we're already pushing back. We're already like, no, I'm not going to accept that. I'm not going to live that way. I'm not going to do that. But the ideology has been so sneaky that it's weaseled its way into my brain, and it pops out in weird places. And I think that I'm against it, but then it sneaks up, like whenever I'm trying to set a standard in my own marriage or set a standard for my business, my company, my leadership team. I think things like accountability, that's judgmental, Reagan. Setting standards, that's judgmental. They don't have to keep your standards. And I start just mixing it all up. I think thoughts like a good Christian would keep the peace and never comment on anyone's behaviors. But that's not Christianity. Again, that's moral relativism, and it has just snuck into our culture, and we now conflate it with Christianity. So let's go back to my client and her marriage. Her husband was pressuring her, and she's ready to explode. What were their standards? She's upset because there's an unspoken standard that she's holding in her mind, and she's not really, her unspoken standard is that he's not allowed to badger her. She's not going to qualify her time to her spouse. But what did this couple agree to? Have they ever thought about what their individual standards are? Have they ever created standards as a couple? No, because again, our culture's kind of been like, that's not a real thing. You shouldn't do that. Just let everybody be free and do everything they want to do. There are no consequences. So in her mind, she's like, well, I'm meeting all of our standards and he's not because he's badgering me. And in his mind, he's like, I'm meeting all of our standards, but she's not because she's never home on time. So here's where we started together. We created a list of standards for her. We really went through, we talked about this last week, but the women's school has a beautiful want and don't want list. And so we really start creating standards by looking at your life and going, what do I want to tolerate and what do I not want to tolerate with my family, with my friends, with my home, with my car, with my health, with my relationship with God, with everything. What do I want to tolerate? What do I not want to tolerate? What do I love? What do I not love? What do I want? What do I not want? And when we finish this beautiful list, we have this really clear idea of the values you hold. And so for my client, she was like, you know what? I am not going to qualify my time to my husband. This is ridiculous. I have a standard of trust. And so okay, so that's step one, knowing your standards. But how the heck to communicate that in a loving way is not quite as easy. So we started with her just by trying to start just standing up for herself in very small ways. Like, she started saying things like, I don't want to answer the question, where are you anymore? Honey, you already know I'm at work, I'm in the car on the way, or I'm running an errand. And I don't want to talk about that anymore. And that way it wouldn't cause a fight, but she would just kind of say little things. She also said, I leave work around 5 and I see you around 5:30 every day. I don't want to discuss this routine anymore. But then as he continued and he stepped over the line, Audie, did you have something to say? Oh, sorry. No, okay. As her husband stepped over the line over and over and over, she became more confident, more clear, and she said things like, I will not respond to text about my whereabouts. So that way he can continue to text her and be ugly and be pressuring and do all the things he wants to do. She can't force him, but she's setting that boundary and she's communicating. I've already told you not to do this, so I won't respond to those texts. And then she got stronger. She said, I would love to talk to you on the phone on the way home, but I will hang up the phone if you bring up my time or my location. Can you guess what happened? It made him so mad. I think I would feel mad too, because she's setting a boundary and boundaries make me uncomfortable, right? She's basically holding him to a standard. You don't get to do that to me. And so it made him so mad. He became more and more angry and they had this huge argument. And when they finally had this argument, this has been going on for 8 years. But because she held him to a standard, because she set that boundary and communicated it, they had this argument and it came out like, honey, I don't feel like I'm badgering you. I feel like if I don't continually ask you and ask you and ask you, you will never leave the office. And he was really showing fear and worry versus anger and pressure. And then they really got to have that conversation. He's like, hey, remember those first 4 years we were married and you never left the office on time? Remember how you have a tendency to work late and you say yes to all the special projects and you feel scared to take any time for yourself? And so you work when you're sick and you work when we want to go on vacation. You answer your phone all the time. Like, this is a real issue. But for 8 years, they had been thinking that this was all about her time and nothing about him really wanting to feel like he's the priority in her life and not work. So then because they were able, she held him accountable. He was able to get to that place. And then they started making a plan together. What do we want our life to look like? What do we want our days to feel like? What do we want our mornings to feel like? Our afternoons after work? How can we each play a role in creating what we want here? And so the next thing my client came to me for help with was she said, Reagan, I need help setting boundaries at work. Because the truth is, I do not feel free enough to design my life with my husband because I feel guilty if I don't put work first. And so, really, what was happening is under the surface, my client was feeling intense pressure to be everything to everyone. And honestly, she was so ready to change that because her husband was at a breaking point. So, we started with her holding her husband accountable. And what a gift that was, because if she hadn't done it, he never would have come face to face with his real fear that he wasn't important to his wife. But in turn, he held her accountable to setting boundaries at work. And what a gift to her, because if he hadn't, she'd still be chained to her desk. So both the husband and the wife grew as whole persons. And then they grew together as a couple because they could feel the gift of accountability rather than the judgment. Audie, do you have any thoughts to add there?
That's so relatable. That's just so relatable. I love to see the parallel of like standing up for yourself. And I love honestly the intimacy, specifically in the husband and wife scenario and relationship where like that must have been a really big fear, like a really big deal. And like I can't imagine like the hurt that was coming from it. And so that's like you said, it is a gift. Like accountability is such a gift. It's such a like the freedom that they felt afterwards, I can only imagine. Like that must have been so awesome. But yeah, no, I am totally with you, Reagan. I feel like I went through a similar situation with my husband and I when we first got married. We didn't really have any standards set. And so we were just kind of like flying around, um, just, doing life like chicken with our heads cut off, just doing whatever we're trying to do, trying to figure it out. And then we'd be so angry about everything for no reason and frustrated, and nobody was on the same page. And I was like, I don't understand why you won't put your laundry in the laundry basket. Cause like, I feel like that's where it needs to go. And I couldn't articulate why this was important to me. Right. And it took us a long time to finally set those standards and understand like, oh, hey, like clean laundry is a good thing. And if all of it's in one place, I don't have to go find the dirty stuff. And so after we set those standards, holding each other accountable, um, I think in my experience with accountability, I didn't start off with a coach doing it. So I did not start off gently. I started off like your client had said, and I was just like, put your dang socks in that hamper, or like, I'm gonna, like, what is wrong with you? Like, it's right there. It's right there. And once I realized, wow, that's doing a lot of damage, and took a step back and I was able to kind of pivot a little bit. And before I started coaching, before I started receiving coaching, um, we were on the right track into becoming like holding each other accountable in a gentle way. But really, like you said, doing this wants and don't wants lists and really coming together to set these standards, it's such a beautiful thing. And it can come out of love and we can heal the hurt in each other's lives with it. And it is a gift. It is a gift.
I think too, Audie, I hear you like really adding a couple of things there. And I see resistance to setting standards across the whole world. Like my husband
Absolutely.
sets standards. My husband's a project manager. So they build these hospitals. There are these huge multi-million dollar projects that have to have standards and procedures or you're going to lose millions of dollars, right? And even amongst his work, people are just like, well, it's going to change every time. We can't really set a standard on this. Well, we can't really set a process here and it's just so interesting because even in like very detailed work, like what comes after this in building a hospital, there's just resistance. Like, I don't think we should set a I don't think we should write it down. I don't think we should say that we're going to do that most of the time. My husband always says, like, we can deviate from the standard, but we have to set it first, or we won't be deviating from anything. We'll just be flying by the seat of our pants.
Yeah.
And it's so fascinating to me why we resist it. And I really think a part of it is just because the culture's really like put that in our heads that it's judgmental.
Yeah.
But also, there are a couple of other pretty famous myths about why we refuse to hold people accountable, even ourselves. One of them is we hope they'll change without feedback.
Interesting.
So I don't know if you're one of those people, some of our listeners, I'm sure those people like, we almost think like, well, he's not usually like that. I'll let it slide this time again. And, or we
That's so true.
even like little kids, sometimes we're like, well, he's tired. And we don't actually say, oh, you cannot speak to me that way.
Yeah.
So it's just interesting when we won't give people insight into the negative consequences of their actions, we're robbing them of the opportunity to learn from their mistakes. It's really easy to see with my little kids.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree. I think like what's coming to mind is a conversation I had with a friend recently, or a colleague. We have another mutual colleague, and she hadn't spoken to her in a while, but I had spoken to her, I like literally I think last week. And so she had asked me just how she was doing, or if I had heard from her. And this friend of mine is like, she's she's a she's so kind. Like they're both beautiful women. And out of the kindness of her heart, she was like, she's just been on my heart, and I was just gonna like reach out to you and see how she was. And so in my first thought, I was just like, okay, like yeah, I'll give you like a little bit of an update. So I was just like, yeah, no, I know she's doing good. I know this, I know this. And then afterwards, I was like, oh, wait a minute, hold on. Like, I don't want to gossip. And so I like after I said that I didn't expel any personal information, I set this boundary here, and this friend and we have the same boundaries. We both don't want to gossip. And so I said, I don't know what you know. Do you mind letting me know what you know? Because I know that I know a little bit more, and I don't want to overstep and like give you too much information. And at first, I had like this fear of holding her accountable, that she was just going to come back and be like, why would you think I was going to give you too much information? Or like, I just wanted you to tell me what was going on. And I feel like we have that fear of holding someone accountable, and we don't want to do that because we're afraid of their reaction, right? And I just like I submitted it. I was like, I don't know what's gonna happen, but I'm just gonna put this here. And I said it gently and calmly and kindly. And she just came back with like, oh yeah, for sure. Like I totally, yeah, on the same page. Totally wasn't trying to gossip. Um, this is what I know, which was less than I thought she knew. And I was just like, so my thought was like, just reach out to her. Like if the Holy Spirit's like calling you to do that, reach out to her. Like I think that's a great idea. And like we set the line there, and we walked that line, and it was just like a really beautiful interaction between two friends. But had I let that fear like get to me, my options would have been A, just tell her everything I know and gossip, or B, be like, oh, I don't know, like just why don't you just go talk to her instead about her. But there's like, and like we can touch on gossip in a different episode, I'm sure. There's such a loving moment, I feel like, between two friends talking about another, that are like genuine good friendship and connection that comes out of that. And I love that I was able to influence this situation and be like, yeah, go, like I'm sure she would love to hear from you. Like go talk to her. And had I let the fear get to me, that wouldn't have happened. Like we wouldn't have had
Mhm.
that gift and that blessing. And so yeah, no, I think fear honestly is a huge driver. Fear of being told that we're wrong, or that holding someone accountable is wrong, or your standards are messed up and you should have different standards. And I think that one's the most powerful for me. It's like, oh my goodness, like you think that these standards you've set for yourself are superior to everyone else's, and you're like, no, but this is what I feel called to do, and the actions I feel called to take. Um, so yeah, fear. I think fear is a big one.
That's so profound. Um, I wrote down yesterday, I was just kind of preparing for this, and I wrote down, if I'm too scared to hold my friend or my husband or my family member accountable because I don't want to ruffle any feathers, make them mad, or lose them, the truth is, I'm avoiding discomfort here at my own discomfort. I'm avoiding my discomfort at the expense of contributing back to the relationship, my honest and loving perspective.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
so it really looks like you're being nice, but it's not. It's selfish because you're really saying, I withhold growing this relationship because I don't want to feel any discomfort.
yeah. Oh, that gave me chills, Reagan. That was good. That is so, so true. Um, I had recently put on an Instagram reel that basically I was talking about the difference between like this feeling of, I guess, control between like parents and grandparents of their grandchild, if that makes any sense, or like family members that are like, oh, I've got to come see that baby, and they don't do anything else. They just want pictures of the child, or they just want to interact with it or whatever, or they're like, oh my gosh, like I haven't talked to you in like 2 years. Send me all the photos of your child. There's like a line of developing a relationship that accountability plays a huge part in. And if you're not respected on that line, me holding them accountable for not being in my life or for not contributing to the health and wellness of myself and my family, that means that me holding them accountable is not sending them pictures. And that'll make some people angry. But that's just the truth. And that's you sticking to your guns and holding yourself accountable to holding them accountable. And it looks ugly. And but it gives us at the same time the opportunity to grow, like you said, instead of just like padding up this like idea of like you can do whatever you want and treat me however you want and that's fine. It's like, no, sorry. Like it doesn't work that way.
Well, and Audie, what you're saying is it sounds selfish. I think it's really hard for Christian women to say,
I agree.
I'm not going to allow people to treat me poorly. They have to respect, they have to show up. Like I demand dignity because I have it, baby. And you got to show it if you want to be in a relationship. And I'm going to show it to you. And I better show it to you if I want to be in a relationship with you. That sounds selfish. But if we go back to the full cultural picture here, if we really want to be women who change this culture and affect the culture and influence it with our Christian ideals, this is raising the whole cultural standard
Yep.
to say we treat people better than this. We show up for people. We don't demand relationships without respect.
Yep.
We don't gossip. Like we really like, even let's say your friend that you're giving that example about, let's say your friend really was ready to gossip. Because that happens too, right? Like you happen to be talking to a good friend, but maybe you have another good friend who just really struggles with gossip. And so she comes to you and she's like, how's she doing? How's she doing? I just really I'm coming in good faith here to you, but how's she doing? And Christians do this a lot, right? Like it's really hard to not gossip because we're on that, like you were describing that line. What if you still told a friend who struggles with gossip, say, I'm scared we're gonna gossip here. Would you mind just telling me what you know? And then so for it really is raising her to a higher standard of her highest self.
Yeah.
You're saying, my friend, I love you and I know you're worth more than gossiping with me right now. Let's both rise up together. And that's not mean. That's not selfish. That is so beautiful to affect and change culture by you setting a beautiful and loving standard. But you have to do it in a nice and a kind, loving, invitational way, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that that's the place we get stuck the most. It's like, well, what do I say?
Yeah.
Like, how do I approach this? And even through fear, just because I've been able to study and practice, and I know this friend of mine that we were talking about she's on the same page with my standards. And so even though there was fear, I knew that fear had nothing to really stand on. Like I could already see her reaction, but I mean, we don't always know who we're talking to in that sense. So there's always that little bit of like, oh my gosh, what if she's having a bad day, or like what if this? And so literally the words that I use is I said, I laid it out there. I said, I don't want to gossip. Um, and so I just appreciate it if you let me know what you know, because I already know that I know more and I don't want to share her business. And I just laid it out there. I was just honest and like put it there. And that was, like I said, scary, but it was helpful. And it's the same thing with my husband and I. Like we'll use the laundry and the socks not where they're supposed to be. Hey babe, like I know that we said that we've got to get the laundry together and we want to go into the weekend without laundry, or something, whatever our standard was. And it's like, I would just really appreciate if you could just remember to put your socks in the basket so I don't miss them whenever I put them in the laundry. And that is met with such good receptivity. He's like, yeah, like, of course, like, I'm sorry I missed that. I forgot to put him there, etc. He doesn't even need to give me an excuse, or like, honestly, I'm like, I don't even need an apology. Like, this is just me holding you accountable. And I'm getting more than I even thought I would going into it, just because of my full on, like, just honesty. Like, it's just like, hey, we said this. I need you to hold up your end of the bargain, bud.
It's so it's so interesting how it creates greater intimacy and greater friendship.
Yeah.
Yesterday in my high tide coaching group, we talked about two things. One, the healthy relationship, communicating in a healthy relationship is very different than communicating in an unhealthy relationship, and we need to talk about that.
Yeah.
But but oh, the other side of things, let's see, is the intimacy and the deeper friendship that we all desire. So let's say we have an acquaintance and we're building and building and building this relationship. At some point, we want to cross over into true friendship. We want to cross over and say, "Oh, they're there for me.
Yeah.
They see me. I can make mistakes and they'll still love me, but they'll also hold me accountable." And they let me hold them accountable, because if accountability is missing from it, there's no way to build friendship.
Yeah.
I mean, even in like we could look at it like in a business, like in the Rising Tide Fellowship. If we didn't have any accountability and we just said everybody can come in here and they can be mean, they can post mean stuff, they can post gross pictures, leadership can go off the wall and do anti-Christian things. We have no standards in here. It would be ruined in the first 24 hours.
Yeah.
Um, So yeah, I think it's just it's another selling point for me, because I'm like you, I'm scared. Usually I'm scared to hold people accountable.
Hmm.
It takes courage for me. It takes faith for me to say, okay, Lord, I put this in your hands. However they respond, even if they say like, well, then I'm not going to be your friend anymore. I
Yeah.
put this in your hands. I have faith that you got this and I need to communicate this.
Yeah.
Um,
I
but then
actually
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just gonna say that actually that happened to me. That's happened to me multiple times where they're like, I'm not gonna respect that. And I've responded in different ways throughout the years. But I want to say this one time, I had a completely different friend, completely different scenario. My husband and I were dating at this point, and she and I were she she's an interesting lady. And she just had like an interesting outlook on life. But like I'm a little weird, and we just got along. Like it was a nice friendship. And my husband and I had had an argument, and rather than going to my husband, trashing him or whatever, I went to her and I was like, I just kind of need to vent about this. And like, I want a different perspective. And she was like, you need to dump him. Like, you need to get out of this relationship. Like, he is no good for you. Like, he's just going to do this to you for the rest of your life. Like, your relationship is doomed. And in this moment, I was like first, after I picked myself up off the floor, because I was just shocked. After I picked myself up off the floor, I was like, she can't speak to me like that. That was my first thought. It wasn't that I needed to defend him. It wasn't anything. It was like, how dare you speak to me this way? And I told her that I was like, I don't appreciate that. Like, this is not beneficial to me, like, how is that, it had nothing to do with even the conversation that we were having. It was just like, get out, like, be done. He's broken, which my husband is not like that. Like, we both have overcome a bunch of different obstacles, and it was like we've learned and grown together, and we have a beautiful marriage. But had I just like listened to her advice, and like that makes me like crazy and toxic. And so taking that step back, and this was respecting myself and honoring myself. And this was honestly me holding myself accountable to not be treated that way. And in turn holding her accountable. And I ended the friendship over this. I was like, I can't do this. And I'm sorry, but I just can't do this. And that was difficult because I was worried, had I made the wrong decision? Was this too harsh? Was this? Was this that? And I was like, in this moment in time, with the other things that we had talked about, I was like, God is not calling me to like hold her hand as she walks this journey. Like, this is not my time. And I feel like that's something else we don't talk about enough in regards to like people's reactions. Um, because you can be gentle and loving all you want, but if you have somebody that's not ready to receive that and is full ready to like go tell you to dump your boyfriend because he's gross and not okay, um, we have to be ready and with our standards to know when to say, I'm sorry, I can't.
Yeah. Well, and that's the difference where we're kind of going into healthy relationships versus unhealthy relationships. And we all
Yeah,
have moments, where we're unhealthy. We throw fits, we say something, we sin, we make mistakes.
absolutely.
Um, and so I don't want to just oversimplify it, but in general, if you have a relationship that is dismissing your needs, puts you down, oversteps your boundaries, disrespects you, or accepts any of those things from you on a consistent basis, it's a pretty toxic and, an unhealthy relationship. And so as we grow and we start setting standards with our unhealthy relationships too, which I think is kind of the first step for many of us, because as we grow here, we're learning, we're growing, we're like, oh, I'm going to get better. I'm going to start respecting myself. I'm going to raise the standard in our culture. I'm going to be a better person. Oh, shoot. That means I have to actually tell her, don't. I had an example written down because I had somebody texting me accusations recently. And I was like, in a healthy relationship, which it's hard to know which one's which sometimes. In a healthy relationship, you could say something like, "Hey, I try not to have serious conversations via text. Can we schedule a phone call?" But this is a very old, unhealthy relationship coming from a place of codependency. And I've tried and tried, we've done years of work to try to get better. But when I said, like, hey, don't text me accusations, 16 more came flying in. Hey, I'm not going to respond to these right now, but if you want to have a phone call, and then ugliness came. And so my response and my accountability has to be a lot stronger. And that's where I think we need to give people the idea of you get to be a lot more gentle and understanding with your healthy relationships because they are looking to respect you. They are looking to respect the relationship. And the other ones where they're not, when they're looking to misunderstand you so that they win and they hold the power and they get to manipulate you, then you have to be a lot more stronger, a lot more strong. So my accountability in that example was, you do not have permission to text me anything mean or accusatory. I am willing to have a phone conversation, but I do not partake in serious conversation via text.
Yeah,
And then
absolutely.
so more ugliness came in and I just deleted them all and was done responding. Because again, I would hope that this person would say, okay, I want to talk on the phone. When do you have time? But I mean, you hope and pray that they'll respond that way, but you don't get to control them.
Yeah.
And I think this is a part of accountability where a lot of people say, well, I don't want to hold people accountable because it's just controlling people. But it's not controlling people. They still get to do what they want to do. You get to call them into account and say, hey, we didn't agree on this. This isn't
Yeah.
okay. But if they choose to continue to do it, then you just get to choose how much you want to partake in that with your time.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that again, it's like, oh, this is selfish. Oh, this is this. Oh, this is that. Like, I want you, like, I think a good way to think about it is to think about our spouse or think about our child and somebody doing this to them. Because you wouldn't allow that to happen to them. So why in the world are you allowing it to happen to you? And this, like, it gets me fired up because there's so many women that do not know their worth and their value. And so we just sit here and let some, like, they let we just let people, like, just unload on us, just treat us like crap. And it's like, imagine somebody doing that to your child, imagine somebody doing that to your husband. Like, you have to teach your children to stand up and say no and scoot away and get out of the situation, or fight back. And I think that's what we're afraid to do. It's like, oh, if I fight back for myself, it's bad, but if I do it for somebody else, it's in the name of holiness and it's fine. But it's holy to fight for yourself. And I think it was you, Reagan, that said this the other day. I can't remember who it was, but ultimately, I think it was Anna. Ultimately, you're responsible for one person. It was Denise. Sorry, three people, but we made it. It was Denise Jelinek. She said you were responsible for one person. And who is that? It's literally you. Like, it's literally you. And so if you're not willing to stand up for yourself, will you stand up for anybody else? It's just, it blows my mind. I'm sorry. Like, I'll get off my
No, it's
soapbox. I
good.
just, like, we have got to stand up for ourselves, because if we don't stand up for ourselves, we're not going to teach anybody else how to do that. And if we don't teach anybody else how to do that, that's part of generational trauma, is that we allow this same thing to happen to everyone else.
There are 100 reasons, Audie. You're 100 reasons. And what we started today was saying, do you ever, I posted in the Rising Tide Fellowship, do you ever blow up on people? Do you ever blow up on people? And if you do, usually that means because you're like my client in the opening example, you held it all in. And so
Yeah.
when we don't hold people accountable, we rob them of the opportunity to grow. We rob them of, that loving contribution, but we transgress our own boundaries, which makes us drained, which makes us angry, which makes us resentful. We lose capacity. And then when you look at the big picture of like, hey, why isn't our culture more holy? Why are all these Christians like lying down and taking it? Because we've transgressed our own boundaries for so long that we're too tired to stand up against the culture. We don't have capacity or knowledge or understanding to stand up against the culture. And so it's like the answer is test it by its fruit. If you don't think standing up for yourself, if you don't think holding people accountable is fruitful, test it. Look at
Yeah.
it. Because when I don't, I become so depleted that I'm not a good mother. I'm not a good wife. I'm not a good friend. I don't create these beautiful things in life. I don't lean into truth, beauty, and goodness. I start playing the victim role in my life, even to God. And it's ugly. And I've done it. I've done it all in every way. And when I do stand up for myself, when I do hold people accountable, it's fruitful. It's self-respect. It's really honoring the God who I was made in his image. It's honoring his earth and really trying to make it look more like his kingdom, and really demanding and creating a beautiful world for our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren to live in. And so which one of those sounds more holy and responsible to you? The lady who lies down and takes it, or the woman who really says, "Oh, you can't speak to me like that."
Yeah. I love to go back to the Christian misconception, is that we are, you shouldn't be angry. Like, there's no room for anger. But if you read through the gospel, you can hear Jesus with anger in his voice multiple times, calling people out, holding people accountable, and then flipping tables. Like, like Jesus flipped tables. Like, we're called to flip tables sometimes. We just are. And we have to have the strength to flip those tables.
I love that. I just love going back into scripture and knowing his character more than these rules. And when you know his character, you're like, oh,
Yeah,
yeah, he held so many people accountable and he still holds me accountable every day.
absolutely.
Oh, so to kind of bring all this together, because we've been building and building and building, I just wanted to show that this woman in my client, first things first, for her to come to me, she had to get to the point where she was recognizing her needs. She's like, whew, I feel angry. I feel hot under my collar. I feel disrespected and pressured by my husband. And that's what Anna and Denise have been trying to teach us in the last few episodes, is like just learning how to become aware of what we're experiencing, becoming aware of our needs, becoming aware of our emotions, just awareness and acceptance. And so my client would never even have come to start the process of healing this, to create a beautiful relationship. She never would have started had she not first honored her own needs and had faith that her relationship could be better. She was not willing to settle for what she had. She wanted more. And then we created standards for ourselves. And we talked about that last week with boundaries and creating standards and what that looks like. And then today, really starting talking about communicating that, how to communicate those needs and boundaries. We can really start communicating them before people cross them. Just saying things like, oh, I try not to gossip, or, oh, I don't respond to text after this time, or just those basic little things, like just to start communicating what your standards are so the people around you know those and respect those. And then when someone oversteps them, being confident enough to say it and hold them accountable, and then allowing them to hold you accountable. So my client was so beautiful because she came in ready to hold her husband accountable. But in the end, she was so humble that she allowed him to hold her accountable. And that's where their true growth was. It was really in her own freedom from that pressure of work.